It is the big game. It's Cal and Stanford on the farm this Saturday, and it is a pretty big game. And Cal may put up a fight this season for the first time in a little while. Bring in Nick Dempsey from Rule of Tree to help us break down this one in light of Stanford's loss last week. Still something to play for because it's not all about the college football playoff. So, Nick, let's start right there. You saw the game, of course, Cal, Stanford, Oregon. So, a lot of us were expecting Stanford to run right through the Pac-12 after the early loss and get things done. Your thoughts about Stanford at this point in the season? Still a lot to play for. There's a Pac-12 championship and a Rose Bowl berth at stake.
Yeah, it's frustrating, I think, for Stanford because they really saved all of their biggest mistakes for one game. It seems like all the fumbles, the turnovers, everything. It's heartbreaking, but it's also weird because a month ago no one was interested in or talking about Stanford to the playoffs, not even Stanford folks. And now all of a sudden it's a little heartbreaking that they're out of it, which is weird. But after that Northwestern loss, if you would have said, "Yeah, this team's going to the has a shot at the Rose Bowl," I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have believed you. And now here we are. We are all they have to do is beat Cal, which is something they're going to want to do, even if they were 0 and 11 or 0 and 10 headed into this game. So it's very interesting the ups and downs of the expectations of the Stanford fan base. But right now, it's just all about beating Cal. Whatever happens after that is fine, but beat Cal is the focus. I'm going to be interested in just how high of energy they can get up after the loss, because it's easy to go out in press conference and say, "Oh, we weren't thinking about the playoffs," and then when you get knocked out, it's a different story. Um, but yeah, I think this team's all in on going to the conference championship game. This team's all in on a Rose Bowl, and everything else is in the rearview mirror now for Stanford.
So, Nick, I'll give you my amateur take on this team, and then you can sharpen it up a little bit. So, I've seen Stanford play probably 5 times, and as is most of the case most of the time, it's going to be against the better teams because those are the games you're going to watch. So, I saw UCLA, I saw Washington State, I saw a little bit of the Oregon game, I saw a few
Hmm.
other games, Northwestern. So I see a very efficient quarterback playing the best football of his career, despite a couple fumbles on snaps last week. But in terms of throwing, running, making the right decisions, making plays with his feet, um, Kevin Hogan playing the best football of his career. We see one of the best backs in the country from the running back position and also from an all-purpose position, probably the best. The typical mauling offensive line, not a great wide receiver core, but functional, do the job, not a lot of dropped passes. On
Hmm.
defense, the front seven, probably a downgrade from what they had when they won the Rose Bowl and lost to Michigan State in the Rose Bowl and had those consecutive Pac-12 championships, and maybe hurting in the secondary a bit, give up some big plays. That's the quick assessment from me.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. I think it's been very interesting that sort of the mid-season changes, because there were a lot of drop passes from that receivers core early on. A lot of, in fact, that really kind of hurt them in the Northwestern game. And Kevin Hogan, I don't think that guy started running until about halfway through the Washington State game. But now all of a sudden it's like a staple of their offense. It's like this other weapon. Um, but yeah, I think the young defense. This is definitely not as good as defenses they even had last year. A lot of people forget they had a stout defense last year. It's just they lost their offense is just not efficient at all in the red zone. But yeah, I think this is a major upgrade on offense and a slight downgrade on defense, which in and of itself is impressive considering they replaced 9 starters on defense and they only had a small downgrade. So credit to that staff. That's impressive.
Everybody knows Jared Goff's on the other side. He will play in the NFL and is expected to be a player in the NFL. Other than that, they have shored up the defense to a certain extent. This is not a great
Hmm.
defense, but they're certainly not giving up 50 points and just gobs of yardage as they have the past few seasons. They ripped off the 5 consecutive wins. They hit Pac-12 play and they hit much better competition. But they've so they have really been dragged around against the likes of UCLA, but then other games they've been very competitive at Utah, at home against USC, within a
Hmm.
score, those 2 games. So it's been a very competitive Cal team.
Yeah, I think this is. I know this is weird to say since we have a very tangible way of judging who's better than who, but I think Cal's record does not reflect how good they actually are. And I say that because I don't know a lot of teams that could go to Utah, take a week off, and then play at UCLA, then host USC, and then go to Oregon. That's a tough month for anybody. I don't know who could come out of that unscathed. Yeah, they lost four straight, but they were competitive in most of those. I think the UCLA and Oregon games got away from them, but they hung in there they had five turnovers and hung in with Utah and had a chance to beat them. So, I got to give them credit. They got things back together against Oregon State. But now, this is big game week. So I think you can expect Cal to play uh, much better than their expectations. I think they're going to outplay what you would assume they'd play. This is a huge game for both teams, and I think Cal in particular would really love the opportunity to knock Stanford out of the Pac-12 North race. I think just beating Stanford, great. Knocking them out of the conference championship race, I think they'd really enjoy.
So I'm guessing Stanford's owned this series the last 5 or 6 years for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe before that, it was a bit hit or miss since they've both taken their lumps from, I don't know, the 90s into the mid 2000s and had decent seasons. Obviously, Cal under Jeff Tedford, it's a pretty good program. Stanford's been up and down prior to the Harbaugh renaissance. So
Yeah, it's this thing seems to go in streaks. This rivalry. It's not like we take one or two, then you take one or two. Um, it's very much like Team A goes on a 7-year streak, and then Team B goes 7 years. So Stanford's up right now. I believe it's 6, 7 in a row they've won. Um, so it's very streaky. It's very era dependent, and in the sort of the Harbaugh regime era, Stanford has definitely taken it over. But it kind of makes you wonder, when does the streak end and Cal takes the rivalry back over? I doubt it'll be this year, but who knows? It's still a big game, so who knows?
So you make some good points on Cal's resume. Past the wins and losses, I saw the UCLA game. That's really the one game they looked to rag it. I even think the Oregon game. I don't have the score in front of me, but I think it was a one-score game most of the way.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the other efforts were very close at Utah, despite the 5 interceptions. They stay within 6 points. And the other games beat Washington State, who's now turned out to be a pretty darn good football team, probably one of the top 20 or 25 teams in the country. So past that, I was thinking Stanford wins this game. I don't have to give it a whole lot of thought, but considering Cal and the schedule, they're probably playing a top 5 or 10 schedule in the country.
I would agree.
Anytime there's 11 guys lined up on the other side of the football with different jerseys, there's a chance that you might lose it. But what's the formula for a Cal loss? And I'm making the assumption that Stanford's not a far better team, but a substantially decided better team.
Yeah, I think if you just look at this game on paper, I would probably say Stanford's probably about 2 scores better. But this game, fortunately for all of us, is not played on paper. Um, and you gotta consider the emotional and mental aspect. Stanford's coming off a heartbreaking loss. Cal desperately wants to knock these guys off. Plus, it's just big game in general. If both of these teams were dreadful and 0-10 coming in, it still would be just a big game. But yeah, I think for Cal to win, they're gonna have to slow the run down for Stanford. Not super shocking news there. And Jared Goff's got to play consistently well for 4 quarters. Jared Goff routinely this season has started off kind of lackluster for the first couple quarters, and then really gets it turned on late in the game. Unfortunately, when he does that, they're usually down by quite a few scores, and it's just not enough time to come back. So Jared Goff, if you're Cal, you want to see 4 excellent quarters from him, and you really want to see your Cal, especially run defense, overperform. That's how Cal's going to take it. Stanford, their recipe, don't shoot yourself in the foot. Just hang on to the ball and play your game. You should be fine. But uh, we've seen they make some critical mistakes in critical games. So, who dictates? That's going to be who wins.
All right, it's Cal Stanford. It's special regardless of the records, but this year we've got one very, very, very good team, probably still, despite the second loss, one of the 10 best teams in the country, and another team with an NFL quarterback throwing the football all over the place and a very improving program that's probably one of the top 30 or 40 teams in the country. So it could turn out to be a really good game with Stanford and Cal and the Cardinal still playing for a Pac-12 championship and a Rose Bowl berth. So Nick Dempsey joining us from Rule of Tree. This one should still be played on the final weekend of the season, Nick, of course, right?
Yeah, I think that's by their own design. I think both schools kind of uh, didn't want this game interfering with Thanksgiving activities and kids being able to go home. As I understood it, I could be wrong on that, but it seems like that was by their choosing. This was not forced on them by TV or the Pac-12 conference. But
Okay. I thought
if
that
it's right,
John Notre Dame program had something to do with it.
well, they probably did too. I mean, you want those sweet, sweet primetime ratings over Thanksgiving, but uh, you know, I don't know. It seems weird because Hate Week should be on Thanksgiving Saturday, but it's not for whatever reason. I don't know, but at least Stanford gets Notre Dame to wrap things up, so that's good for them.
Good stuff. Nick, always appreciate the time.
Of course, anytime.